3 monumental conservative victories. Biden's student loan forgiveness scheme was slapped down. The court ruled the government can't coerce individuals into speech that violates their religious convictions. And of course, they eliminated one of the most egregious examples of systematic institutional racism still surviving in the U.S. That's affirmative action. And all this is on top of conservative wins last term when the Supreme Court strengthened the Second Amendment in a right to carry case, and of course, whenever they struck down Roe v. Wade. These are historic wins for conservatives that will impact our legal system for decades. And they are, of course, attributable to President Trump, whose 3 Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh, delivered the wins. When it really mattered, Trump's picks pulled through, and that's a big deal. President Trump deserves sole credit for that. The reason the past 2 years have been so enjoyable, so refreshing, is that major Supreme Court wins are something new for conservatives. For the past several decades, the court could only be described as center-left at best, if not far left at times. Conservatives have become accustomed to being disappointed by the courts. It was just what we expected. Why is that? We've had several Republican presidents and lots of court nominations. So let's take a look back at how they went and compare past Republican Supreme Court nominees to President Trump's. While the last Republican president prior to Trump, George W. Bush, appointed 2 Supreme Court judges. Of those 2, one of them, John Roberts, has been considered a swing vote for the past decade. You might remember him best for his activist work in 2012, where he rewrote the Affordable Care Act to give us Obamacare, and for that alone, we should consider him an abject failure. Bush's second pick was Samuel Alito. He's been a winner. He's consistently been a conservative leader on the court. But if we're judging Bush's record, it's worth pointing out one caveat. Alito was Bush's second choice. His top preference was a woman named Harriet Miers. She would have undoubtedly been far more liberal, specifically on issues like abortion and affirmative action. Her nomination was such a humiliating disaster that Bush had to withdraw it. So George Bush, in his 8 years as president, nominated 2 justices, only one of which was a reliable conservative, and even he was Bush's backup choice. The 50% batting average, not good. So what about his father, George H.W. Bush? He also got 2 Supreme Court justices, and they were replacements for very liberal judges Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan. That means President Bush Sr. had an historic opportunity to massively reshape the court's ideology. His first nominee, Clarence Thomas, of course, was a huge success. He was instrumental in the affirmative action case last week, and he's been an all-around great justice, a great conservative leader. And Bush deserves credit for sticking with Thomas through then-Senator Joe Biden's egregiously racist attacks against him. But his other pick was David Souter, who was an unmitigated disaster. Additionally, it's worth noting that when he was president, George Bush Sr. also appointed Justice Sonia Sotomayor to a U.S. District Court in New York. She was obviously later tapped as one of Obama's 2 Supreme Court picks. In other words, Bush Sr. played a key role in the career progression of one of the most radically left-wing Supreme Court activist judges in our history. So Bush Sr. also had a 50-50 record, with the additional mark against him for aiding and abetting Sotomayor's rise to power. Even Reagan Supreme Court justices were a mixed bag. He appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, William Rehnquist, Antonin Scalia, and Anthony Kennedy. Of those, only 2, Scalia and Rehnquist, could be considered reliably conservative. Scalia was one of the greatest Supreme Court justices we've had in modern history. But Anthony Kennedy, who was supposed to be a conservative, ended up being a swing vote and pushed the court to the left on most social issues. And O'Connor was instrumental in expanding abortion in the U.S. The point of saying all this is that Republicans have historically had a terrible record of Supreme Court picks. Since the beginning of Ronald Reagan's first term until Trump was elected, 12 Supreme Court vacancies were filled. Of those 12, Republicans filled 8. Democrats only filled 4. That's 2/3 of Supreme Court vacancies in the 40 years leading up to Trump. During that time, we should have had decisive victories on nearly every single major issue, but we didn't. So when conservatives say President Trump gave us major wins on the Supreme Court, that's a big deal. No other Republican president has been able to reshape the Supreme Court like Trump did. In fact, based on the last few years' Supreme Court wins alone, Donald Trump is one of the most effective presidents, conservative presidents in our history.